Why are there so many languages spoken in Africa? It sounds like a simple question. It has a profound answer. 2,000 languages. Some estimates say 2,100. The exact number depends on where you draw the line between a language and a dialect. But no one disputes the order of magnitude. Africa is home to roughly 1/3 of all the languages on Earth. Think about that. One continent, 20% of the Earth's land surface, 1/3 of all human languages. How? Why? What does it tell us about Africa's past? And what does it mean for Africa's future? The short answer is this. Africa's linguistic diversity is the direct product of Africa's extraordinary antiquity as the cradle of humanity. Languages are old here. Civilizations are old here. And diverse. 100,000 years of human diversity, expressed through the medium of language. That is what 2,000 languages sounds like. Today we are going to explore that story. The 4 great language families. The individual languages. Swahili, Hausa, Yoruba, Amharic, Arabic, Zulu. The scripts that Africans invented. The languages that colonialism tried to destroy. The ones that are dying today. And the extraordinary revival happening right now. Welcome to GriotWave Academy. Before we continue, it is important to understand the mission behind GriotWave Academy. This platform was created to preserve knowledge, culture, music, and stories that often go unheard or are forgotten. GriotWave is not just about content. It is about building independent systems of learning, creativity, and empowerment. Through books, audio, technology, and media, the goal is to transform timeless wisdom into practical tools for today's generation and future generations. Before we go into the why, let's establish the what. 2,000 languages. Let me put that in perspective. All of Europe, from Portugal to Russia, from Iceland to Cyprus, has approximately 287 languages. That includes every dialect, every regional variety, every dying minority language. 287. Africa, 2,000, 7 times as many. And Europe is not a linguistically poor region by world standards. There are approximately 6,000 to 7,000 languages spoken on Earth today. Africa has roughly 1/3 of them, on 20% of the land area. This is the single most linguistically dense major region in human history. 4 great families organize this diversity, and we will cover each of them in depth. Niger-Congo, Afro-Asiatic, Nilo-Saharan, and Khoisan. Understanding these 4 families is like understanding the 4 root systems of a vast forest. The individual trees, the 2,000 languages, are products of these deep structures. And then there are the individual languages that carry civilizations. Swahili, the language of East African trade, and the African Union's newest official language. Hausa, one of the world's most widely spoken languages, with 70 to 90 million native speakers. Yoruba, the language of 45 million people, and of an entire philosophical and spiritual tradition. Arabic, linking North Africa to a global civilization stretching from Morocco to Oman. This is not fragmentation. This is wealth. This is what 100,000 years of human linguistic creativity looks like. The answer to why Africa has 2,000 languages has 6 parts, and each part connects to something fundamental about human history. Reason 1. Africa is the cradle of humanity. Homo sapiens sapiens emerged in Africa approximately 200,000 to 300,000 years ago. For at least 130,000 years, before the major out-of-Africa migrations, all humans lived in Africa. Language had 130,000 years to diversify within a single continent. Every other region on Earth was populated by humans who left Africa, taking a subset of African genetic and linguistic diversity with them. Africa kept everything. The rest of the world got a sample. This is why Africa has more genetic diversity than all other continents combined. And it's why Africa has more linguistic diversity than all other continents combined. Diversity and antiquity go together. Reason 2. Geographic separation. Africa has the world's largest desert, the world's second largest rainforest, the world's longest river system, and the world's most dramatic continental rift. These barriers divided communities for thousands of years. Each division became a new language. Reason 3. No single dominant civilization imposed a lingua franca. This is crucial. China had 4,000 years of imperial bureaucracy that standardized Mandarin. Rome imposed Latin across Europe. Britain imposed English across its empire. Africa never had a single pan-continental power that did this. Its diversity was protected by its political plurality. The other 3 reasons. Ecological diversity, trade without homogenization, and the power of oral tradition all reinforce the same conclusion. Africa is linguistically rich because it is humanly old, geographically varied, politically plural, and culturally deep. Every one of Africa's 2,000+ languages belongs to one of 4 great ancestral families. These are the 4 root systems of Africa's linguistic forest. Family 1. Niger-Congo. The world's largest language family by number of languages, 1,542 languages. Stretching from Senegal to South Africa. Its most famous branch is Bantu, which gave the world Swahili, Zulu, Xhosa, Igbo, Kinyarwanda, Shona, and hundreds more. Niger-Congo languages share deep grammatical features: noun class systems, tonal marking, verb extension suffixes. Family 2. Afro-Asiatic. 375 languages. The family that connects Africa to the Middle East. Arabic, Amharic, Hausa, Somali, Oromo, and the Berber/Tamazight languages of North Africa. Arabic alone has 370 million native speakers globally. Hausa has 70 to 90 million. This family bridges 2 continents and 3 major world religions. Family 3. Nilo-Saharan. 207 languages. The languages of the Nile Corridor: Dinka, Luo, Kanuri, Songhai, Fur. Spoken by some of Africa's most historically significant pastoral civilizations. Less well known than Niger-Congo or Afro-Asiatic, but representing extraordinary human diversity. Family 4. Khoisan. Approximately 30 languages. The smallest by speaker count, but the most ancient. Khoisan languages, spoken by San communities in southern Africa, may be the closest living languages to the first human languages ever spoken. Their famous click consonants are among the most complex sounds in any human language. And genetic evidence suggests that San populations in southern Africa are among the oldest continuous human lineages on Earth. Niger-Congo is the world's largest language family by number of languages, 1,542, and arguably by geographic reach. It stretches from Senegal on Africa's Atlantic coast to South Africa's Cape, across the width and length of sub-Saharan Africa. At its heart is the Bantu branch, approximately 600 languages, which was spread by one of the most remarkable demographic events in human prehistory. Beginning around 3,000 years ago, Bantu-speaking communities from the Nigeria-Cameroon border region began expanding southward and eastward. Carrying agriculture, yams, sorghum, cattle, and ironworking technology, they gradually displaced or absorbed earlier hunter-gatherer populations across Central, Eastern, and Southern Africa. By the time the Bantu expansion reached its southern limits in present-day South Africa, around 400 to 500 CE, it had spread a family of related languages across an area larger than Europe. Today you can see the linguistic fingerprints of this ancient expansion: Swahili in Kenya, Rwanda's Kinyarwanda, Zimbabwe's Shona, South Africa's Zulu and Xhosa. All are cousins, all descended from the same Bantu ancestor spoken 3,000 years ago. The structural features of Niger-Congo languages are fascinating. Noun class systems, where every noun belongs to a class that determines how adjectives, verbs, and pronouns agree with it, create grammatical precision that European gender systems only hint at. Tonal systems mean that pitch carries meaning. In Yoruba, Igba at high-mid-low pitch means calabash. At low-low-high, it means garden. Language and music intertwine in ways European linguistic theory has historically underappreciated. The Afro-Asiatic family is the one that connects Africa to the rest of the world most directly. It bridges 2 continents, Africa and Asia, in a single linguistic family that includes Arabic, Hebrew, Amharic, Hausa, Somali, and the Berber languages of the Sahara. Arabic needs no introduction in terms of global reach. 370+ million native speakers, one of the 6 official languages of the United Nations, the language of the Quran, and the first language of all of North Africa. But what is often underappreciated is that Arabic is itself an African language, spoken by more Africans than any other single language on the continent. Egypt, with 108 million people, is the world's most populous Arabic-speaking country. Hausa surprises people. It is not well known outside of Africa, but 70 to 90 million people speak it as a first language, making it more widely spoken than Italian, Korean, or French. It is the dominant commercial language of the Sahel and northern Nigeria, spoken in markets from Kano to Niamey to N'Djamena. BBC Hausa service broadcasts to more listeners than many European language services. Amharic is perhaps Africa's most historically significant language, the national language of Ethiopia, written in one of the world's oldest continuously used alphabets, the Ge'ez script, which we will discuss in detail later. Ethiopia maintained literate culture in Amharic for over 1,500 years, producing theological texts, royal chronicles, and literature, in a tradition continuous from the ancient Aksumite kingdom. And the Berber languages, Tamazight, deserve recognition as North Africa's indigenous tongues. Spoken before the Phoenicians came, before the Romans came, before the Arabs came, the Amazigh people have maintained their language through every conquest. Nilo-Saharan is the least well-known of the 4 major African language families, but its speakers include some of Africa's most historically significant communities. 207 languages, 60 million speakers, spread across a vast arc from Mali to Tanzania, concentrated in the Nile Corridor, the geography that gave the family its name. The Dinka of South Sudan, 4 to 5 million speakers of Tujai, have one of the most phonologically complex languages on Earth. Linguists studying Dinka report vowel systems so elaborate, different voice quality distinctions, different vowel lengths, different tones, that it took decades of study to fully document. And yet Dinka children learn it effortlessly, as all children learn their mother tongue. The complexity is invisible to those who grow up with it. The Maasai deserve particular mention, a community that has maintained its language, its dress, its pastoral economy, and its cultural identity through colonialism, independence, tourism pressure, and modernization. When most experts predicted they would assimilate within a generation, they refused. Ma is still alive because the Maasai chose it to be. And the Songhai Empire, often overlooked in global history, was one of the world's largest and most sophisticated empires of the 15th and 16th centuries. At its peak, it controlled the trans-Saharan gold and salt trade, housed the University of Sankore in Timbuktu, and fielded a professional military. Its language, Songhai, is the linguistic inheritance of that civilizational achievement, and it is still spoken today. Khoisan languages are the most extraordinary linguistic phenomenon on Earth, and I want you to understand why. Click consonants. When most people first hear Khoisan languages, they focus on the clicks as a curiosity, something exotic, something foreign-sounding. But that framing completely misses the point. Click consonants in Khoisan languages are not decorative. They are load-bearing. They are core phonemes, without which you cannot say words. The XO language of Botswana and Namibia has 5 distinct click types, each appearing in multiple forms. Xu has approximately 2 distinct phonemes, more than any other language known to linguists. English has about 44. Now consider this. Genetic evidence shows that San communities in southern Africa represent the oldest continuous human lineages on Earth. Their ancestors diverged from the rest of humanity's family tree over 100,000 years ago. If you want to find the language most likely to preserve features of early human speech, Khoisan is your best candidate. The extinction crisis in Khoisan is therefore not just a cultural tragedy, it is potentially the permanent loss of irreplaceable evidence about human linguistic prehistory. NUU, a language of extraordinary phonological complexity, may survive only as recordings when its last speakers are gone. And the San communities who speak Khoisan languages are among the world's most ancient continuous cultures. Their rock art in the Drakensberg and Cedarburg Mountains of South Africa is 30,000 years old. Their healing traditions, their ecological knowledge, their cosmological systems, all encoded in click languages that the world barely notices. Swahili, Kiswahili, is Africa's greatest success story in the creation of a trans-ethnic, transnational, genuinely African lingua franca. Its origin is already a fascinating story. A Bantu language that evolved on the East African coast through a millennium of Indian Ocean trade. Arab merchants, Persian traders, Indian merchants, Portuguese colonizers, they all left words in Swahili. Its vocabulary is an archaeological record of Indian Ocean commercial history. Skumawiki, okra, from a Bantu root. Safari, journey, from Arabic safar. Chai, tea, from Indian chai. Bandera, flag, from Portuguese bandera. This mixing didn't produce a diluted language. It produced a rich, flexible, dynamic one. Swahili absorbed what it needed, and remained essentially Bantu in structure. Its grammar, its noun class system, its verb morphology, all are unmistakably Bantu. The African Union's decision, in 2022, to add Swahili as an official continental language was historic. For the first time, an indigenously sub-Saharan African language, one not imposed by colonialism, took its place alongside the colonial languages as a continental communication medium. This was sovereignty expressed through language policy. And Swahili is young. Not as a language, it's 1,000 years old, but in its global moment. Bongo Flava, Tanzanian Swahili hip-hop, is one of Africa's most commercially successful music genres. Kenyan Swahili literature has produced Nobel-caliber writers. When you watch Netflix in East Africa, many shows are dubbed in Swahili. This is a living, urban, digitally active language, not a museum piece. 2 languages, 2 civilizational traditions, both in West Africa, both among the world's most significant languages by speaker count and cultural depth. Hausa, 70 to 90 million native speakers. If Hausa were a European language, it would be among Europe's top 4, more widely spoken than Italian, more than Polish, more than Dutch. But because it is an African language, it rarely appears in global language league tables. Hausa is primarily a language of trade and urban life. The great Hausa cities, Kano, Katsina, Zaria, Sokoto, were among Africa's most important commercial centers for a millennium. The trans-Saharan trade routes that connected West Africa to North Africa and the Mediterranean ran through Hausa territories. Kano, founded in 999 CE, was already a major city when European explorers first reached it in the 19th century. Hausa has a writing tradition, in Arabic script, called Ajami, that predates colonial contact by 200 years. Hausa scholars were composing poetry, history, and religious texts in Ajami, while Europe was still debating whether Africans had a concept of literacy. Yoruba carries a different kind of weight, the weight of diaspora. The transatlantic slave trade brought Yoruba speakers to Brazil, Cuba, Trinidad, and the United States in enormous numbers. Their language survived in religious traditions, candomblé in Brazil, Lukumi/Santeria in Cuba. Yoruba words are spoken in religious ceremonies in Sao Paulo and Havana and New York, by people who may not know they are speaking an African language that originated in Ile-Ife, Nigeria. The Yoruba philosophical tradition, Ifa, is UNESCO recognized as intangible cultural heritage. It is a comprehensive cosmological system, divination, ethics, medicine, music, and storytelling, all encoded in a language of extraordinary tonal complexity. One of the world's great hidden facts about African literacy is this. While European scholars in the 18th and 19th centuries were debating whether Africans had ever developed writing systems, Ethiopian scholars were composing theological treatises, royal chronicles, and literary epics in a script that was 1,400 years old. Gaya's script, the Ethiopic writing system, is one of the world's oldest continuously used alphabets. Originating in the Aksumite kingdom around the 4th century CE, it has been used without interruption for over 1,600 years. That is older than the current forms of the Latin alphabet, older than most European writing traditions. The Kebra Nagast, Glory of Kings, is one of Africa's great literary masterpieces, a 13th century epic that recounts the story of the Queen of Sheba, her encounter with King Solomon, and the birth of the Ethiopian royal lineage. It is the foundational text of Ethiopian national identity and a cornerstone of Rastafarian cosmology. It exists because Ethiopia had a writing tradition. The Ethiopic syllabary is remarkable in its complexity, 231 base characters, each representing a consonant-vowel combination. Learning to read and write Amharic requires mastering all of them. And yet generations of Ethiopian children have done so, because the tradition of literacy was never broken. Not by colonialism, Ethiopia was never colonized, not by war, not by any of the forces that disrupted African literacy elsewhere. This is what cultural sovereignty looks like. A writing system that is still alive after 1,600 years. Tifana is one of the world's oldest continuously used writing systems, and one of the least well-known. The Amazigh people, the Amazigan, the Free People, are the indigenous inhabitants of North Africa from the Atlantic coast to Egypt. They were there before the Phoenicians arrived from Canaan, before the Romans arrived from Italy, before the Arabs arrived from Arabia, and they had their own writing system, Tifana. Exactly how old Tifana is debated. Definitive inscriptions date to the 3rd century BCE, but the symbols, highly geometric, consistent, structured, appear in rock art contexts that some scholars date much earlier. Tifana may be several thousand years old. What makes Tifana particularly remarkable is who maintained it. Among the Tuareg, the nomadic Amazigh people of the Sahara, it was traditionally women who were the primary bearers of Tifana literacy. Men might speak Arabic or French in commercial and religious contexts, but Tuareg women kept the Tifana script alive, inscribing it on rocks, leather, and household objects. Language as feminine sovereignty, an extraordinary inversion of the pattern seen almost everywhere else in the world, where writing traditions are male-dominated. The 21st century revival of Tifana is one of Africa's great cultural sovereignty stories. Morocco constitutionally recognized Tamazight as an official language in 2011. Tifana entered the Unicode standard in 2004. Moroccan schools now teach it. There are Tifana smartphone keyboards. An ancient script is learning to text. One of the most persistent myths about Africa is that it was an oral continent, that African peoples did not develop writing systems, and that literacy came with colonial languages. This is completely false. Africa has invented more writing systems than any other region on Earth. We've already discussed Gayas and Tifana. Now let me introduce you to 4 more. Nasabiti is an ancient ideographic script from Nigeria and Cameroon, geometric, pictographic symbols that represent concepts and ritual knowledge. It was documented before European contact. How old it is, nobody knows for certain. Old. Very old. The Vai script of Liberia was independently invented in 1833, making it one of the first documented cases in history of an individual, Momolu Duwalu Bukele, inventing a complete writing system independently, without any known model. Western linguists who encountered it in the 19th century were astonished. Here was a functioning syllabary with over 200 signs in a West African language created without external influence. Niko, invented in 1949 by Suleiman Kante in Guinea, was a deliberate act of linguistic sovereignty, creating a script for Mande languages that was not Arabic, not Latin, but African. Today, millions of people in West Africa and the diaspora use Nko for books, newspapers, and social media. Every time someone invents a new writing system, they are saying, our language deserves to be written. Our thoughts deserve to be recorded. Our words matter. That impulse, that assertion of linguistic dignity, is one of the most human things that exists. And African peoples have expressed it repeatedly, across centuries and across the continent. To understand African languages, you must understand the griot. Because the griot is the institution that kept Africa's 2,000 languages alive for thousands of years without the need for writing. Griot, from the French transliteration of the Wolof word gewo. In Mande, Gieli. In Fula, Gaulo. Every West African society had this role: the hereditary oral historian, genealogist, musician, diplomat, and counselor. The person whose job was to remember. A master griot in the Mande tradition can recite oral genealogies going back 70 generations. 700 years of family history. Every name, every marriage, every political alliance, every battle, every drought, every negotiation, preserved in memory through the technology of music, rhythm, and mnemonic formula. And these aren't just approximate records. Researchers comparing griot oral traditions with archaeological findings have confirmed remarkable accuracy. The griots of the Gambia's Kunta Kinte family, Alex Haley's roots traced his ancestor through a griot, were able to provide information about the time and place of kidnapping that matched 18th century slave ship records. The MC in hip-hop is a griot, the rhythmic, narrative, identity-affirming oral performance, telling where you come from, who your people are, what they have endured and achieved. That is exactly the griot tradition. James Brown performing his ancestry. Kendrick Lamar documenting Compton. Burna Boy speaking of Afrobeats as a political statement. Every one of them operating in a tradition that is 1,000 plus years old and African to its roots. Africa's 2,000 languages did not survive European colonialism because colonialism was neutral toward them. They survived despite systematic, deliberate, and sustained efforts to destroy them. The French assimilation policy was explicit. To be a French subject was to speak French. African languages were banned in colonial schools. Children who spoke their mother tongue in school were punished, sometimes physically. The goal was not just to teach French. It was to make the student ashamed of their own language. The British approach was more hypocritical, but equally damaging. A colonial ideology that positioned English as the language of modernity, intelligence, and civilization, and African languages as the languages of the primitive past. This wasn't a ban. It was something more insidious. A hierarchy of value that made Africans internalize the inferiority of their own tongues. The Berlin Conference of 1884 compounded the linguistic damage. 54 countries were drawn without regard for the communities they divided. The Awe people were split between British Gold Coast and German Togoland. The Hausa were split between British Nigeria and French Niger. The Somali were divided across 4 colonial powers. Families found themselves speaking the same language, but belonging to different nations. Nations that would eventually go to war with each other. And yet, the languages survived, griots continued. Mothers kept speaking to children in their own tongues. Quranic schools maintained Arabic literacy, where colonial schools tried to replace it. African languages went underground and emerged again after independence. Ngugi W. Thiong'o, the Kenyan novelist, put it precisely. The destruction of a people's language is the annihilation of their identity. Africa's languages survived because Africa's identity survived. Imperfect, damaged, but alive. Africa's linguistic crisis is not only in the past, it is happening right now, today, in this moment. 250 African languages are classified as endangered. Dozens are on the verge of permanent extinction. An African language falls silent every few months, not through any cataclysm, but through the quiet accumulation of economic pressure, migration, schooling in dominant languages, and the death of elders who spoke tongues nobody else remembers. Ongota in Ethiopia, fewer than 10 speakers. Not 10,000. 10 people. Ongota is a language isolate, meaning it has no known relatives anywhere in the world. When Ongota dies, it will not be a variation of something else that survives. It will be unique and permanent loss. Shabo, also in Ethiopia, also a language isolate, fewer than 600 speakers. The exact classification of Shabo is still debated. Some linguists think it may be the last remnant of a completely unknown language family. We may lose it before we fully understand what it is. What is actually lost when a language dies? The answer is not romantic. It is specific and practical. The Hadzabe language of Tanzania encodes hundreds of distinct terms for plants, animals, geological features, and weather patterns. Ecological knowledge built up over tens of thousands of years of intensive observation of the East African landscape. When Hadzabe dies, and it is under severe pressure, that knowledge goes with it. No translation exists. No textbook captures it. It is simply gone. Languages are not just communication tools. They are archives. And Africa's archives are burning. Before we continue, if you are a builders, creators, entrepreneurs, purpose-driven individuals, the GriotWave Inner Circle is now open. If you want to explore this topic further, Scan the QR code for additional resources, courses, recommended readings, maps, and extended discussions. There is far more to Africa than what can fit into a single episode, and this is only the beginning of a much deeper journey into the continent's history, cultures, people, and future. And if you'd like a deeper dive into any topic related to Africa or Pan-Africanism, leave a comment below and we'll cover it in a future video. Multilingualism is not an exception in Africa. It is the norm. The African who speaks only one language is the unusual case. I want you to imagine a typical working-class Nigerian in Lagos. He speaks Yoruba, his mother tongue, the language of his grandparents, his religion, his deepest emotional register. He speaks Pidgin English, the street language, the market language, the language you speak when you need to communicate across ethnic lines and you want to sound real rather than formal. He speaks standard Nigerian English, because that's what the schools taught and what the formal economy requires. And there's a good chance he also speaks some Hausa, because of trade, because of football, because of radio. 4 languages. Not exotic, standard. Now consider what this means cognitively. Every time this person speaks, he is running 4 linguistic systems simultaneously, selecting, switching, contextualizing. The research is unambiguous. Habitual multilingualism produces measurable cognitive benefits, better attention management, better task switching, a reduced rate of cognitive decline in old age. Code switching, the rapid movement between languages within a conversation, is not a sign of linguistic confusion. It is a sign of mastery. Sociolinguists studying code switching in Nairobi, Lagos, and Accra have found that it follows precise grammatical rules. You switch at syntactically defined points. You use one language for technical terms and another for emotional emphasis. Code switching is the most sophisticated form of linguistic behavior, and African urban communities do it automatically. The most linguistically equipped people on Earth may be ordinary Africans going about their daily lives. Frantz Fanon, the Martiniquais philosopher who gave intellectual architecture to African decolonization, understood something fundamental. Language is not just how you communicate. Language is how you think. And how you think determines what you can imagine. And what you can imagine determines what you can build. Colonialism's linguistic legacy is not just the replacement of African languages with European ones. It is the colonization of African minds through language, the internationalization of a hierarchy in which the colonizer's tongue sounds like intelligence, and the indigenous tongue sounds like backwardness. Ngugi W. Thiong'o's decision in 1977 to write only in Gikuyu was an act of extraordinary political courage. He was one of Kenya's most celebrated novelists. Weep Not Child, A Grain of Wheat, internationally acclaimed, academically celebrated. He gave that up. He chose Gikuyu. His first Gikuyu novel and play were suppressed. He was detained without trial by the Kenyan government. Language was that dangerous. Because language is. When Swahili proverbs say, haba na haba hujaza kibaba, little by little fills the measure, they encode a philosophy of incremental progress that is simultaneously practical wisdom and cultural worldview. When Zulu greeting Sawubona, I see you, replies, Ngikona, I am here, I am seen, it is not just politeness. It is a philosophical affirmation. I exist because you recognize my existence. This is what Africa risks losing if its languages are abandoned for global ones, not just communication. Entire ways of being human. The relationship between African languages and digital technology is one of the most consequential battles in the history of African culture, and it is happening right now, in real time. For most of the internet's history, African languages were invisible in the digital world. The internet was built in English, for English speakers, with English language data at its core. When AI systems were trained on internet data, they absorbed all the biases of that English-dominated corpus. The result: AI that thinks in English, reasons in English, and produces outputs that reflect English language cultural assumptions. For 1.4 billion Africans who primarily think, feel, and communicate in languages other than English, this is not a minor inconvenience. It is a form of digital exclusion. Masakane Let Us Build Together in Zulu is the most important African response to this crisis. A pan-continental research collective developing natural language processing models for over 300 African languages. Not English AI adapted for African use. African AI, built on African language data, by African researchers. Swahili Wikipedia is a small but meaningful victory. 70,000 plus articles, maintained by an active community of Swahili language contributors. This means that Swahili-speaking students can access encyclopedic knowledge in their own language, not just a translated version of someone else's. Google Translate's expansion to cover Hausa, Yoruba, Amharic, Somali, and others is double-edged. It makes those languages more accessible, but it also runs the risk of training Africans to translate their thoughts into English, rather than generate them in their own languages. The question for the next 20 years: will technology kill African languages, or save them? There is a powerful counter-movement to the extinction of African languages, and it is gaining momentum. Tanzania's story is the most important. Julius Nyerere, made Swahili the primary language of education at independence in 1967. This was radical. Other African leaders chose the colonial language for pragmatic reasons: more developed, more internationally recognized, more compatible with existing bureaucratic infrastructure. Nyerere chose Swahili and created the most linguistically coherent nation-state in Africa. The result? Tanzania has a national identity that transcends its many ethnic groups, partly because there is a shared language that belongs to everyone. No Tanzanian ethnic group speaks Swahili as its mother tongue. It is everyone's adopted national language, which means it belongs to everyone equally. This is linguistic genius. Morocco's constitutional recognition of Tamazight is equally significant, a language that was suppressed under both colonial and post-colonial regimes. Arabic nationalism was as hostile to Berber languages as French colonialism, has been restored to official status. Amazigh children now learn Tifana in state schools. A writing system 3,000 plus years old is learning PowerPoint. And Somalia's 1972 standardization campaign is perhaps the most dramatic. A country with a completely oral language, no standardized writing existed, launched a national literacy campaign. Teachers were deployed, materials printed. A nation taught itself to read, in its own language, in a few years. The data on literacy rates from that period are remarkable. Political will is the variable. Languages revive when governments decide they should. Every language policy decision in Africa is ultimately a political question about power, identity, and development priority. And there are no easy answers. The pragmatic case for colonial languages is real. French links 29 African countries, from Morocco to Madagascar, from Senegal to Djibouti. English links 23 more. These are already shared, if imperfect, media of continental communication. Jettisoning them entirely would create enormous short-term costs for education, administration, and international economic integration. But Ngugi's critique is also real. When African scholars must write in French or English to be taken seriously, they are doing their deepest thinking in someone else's language. The concepts that don't translate, the philosophical structures that are uniquely African, get left out. The African mind performs in a European house. Chinua Achebe, who wrote in English, made a different argument. English is now an African language too, shaped and owned by Africans. Nigerian English, Kenyan English, South African English. These are not corrupted versions of British English. They are new Englishes, with their own idioms, their own rhythms, their own genius. The Swahili breakthrough at the AU in 2022 is the most exciting development. For the first time, a language that originated in Africa, that belongs to no colonial power, that is nobody's mother tongue, which means nobody's exclusive property, has been given continental standing. If African education systems begin seriously teaching Swahili as a second language, alongside the mother tongue in English or French, Africa will have built a genuinely African communication infrastructure within a generation. One of the most powerful forces keeping African languages alive in the 21st century is music, and the global reach of Afrobeats has made African languages audible to a world that never heard them before. When Wizkid released Essence, featuring Thames mixing Yoruba phrases with English, it became one of the most streamed African songs in history. Millions of people around the world learned to sing along with Yoruba words they didn't understand. They felt the language, the tonal quality, the rhythm, the cultural atmosphere of the words. All of that transmitted across the language barrier through music. This is not new. African languages encoded themselves in music long before Afrobeats. The rhythms of jazz, created by African Americans in New Orleans, trace to West African drumming traditions. The tonal structures of blues, the blue notes, the call and response, are African linguistic patterns expressed through music. When the slave trade destroyed the languages, the rhythms survived, and the rhythms carried the cultural DNA of those lost languages into new worlds. The connection between tonal languages and musical genius is worth exploring. In Yoruba, Igbo, and most Bantu languages, pitch is grammatically meaningful. Different tones distinguish different words. Speaking is already a musical act. The step from tonal speech to tonal music is therefore smaller in these language communities than in non-tonal language communities. African musical sophistication may be partly a structural product of African linguistic sophistication. Music is the mass market for language. When Umu Sangare performs in Bambara for sold-out audiences across West Africa and Europe, she is not just entertaining, she is teaching Bambara to everyone who listens. Language preservation has never had a better marketing team than African musicians. Let's put Africa's linguistic diversity in global perspective, because the comparison is illuminating. Europe has approximately 287 languages. This includes everything from Basque, the mystery language isolate that predates the Indo-European migrations, to Romani, to the dozens of Romance, Germanic, and Slavic languages that cover the continent. 287 languages. Europeans consider this remarkably diverse. Africa has 2,000. On the same order of land area, 7 times as many languages. 20 times the linguistic density per square kilometer. Asia has slightly more total languages, approximately 2,300, but Asia has 4.5 billion people on 44 million square kilometers. Africa has 1.4 billion people on 30 million square kilometers. Proportional to both land area and population, Africa is more linguistically diverse than Asia. The one place that rivals Africa for linguistic density is Papua New Guinea. 800 plus languages for 10 million people on less land area than Zimbabwe. PNG's extraordinary linguistic diversity comes from the same source as Africa's: ancient human settlement, geographic isolation, and political fragmentation that allowed communities to develop independently for thousands of years. Why should a biologist or a pharmacologist or a climatologist care about African linguistic diversity? Because ecological knowledge is encoded in language. The 2,000 languages of Africa collectively contain descriptions of plants, animals, weather patterns, soil conditions, and ecological relationships, accumulated over tens of thousands of years of intensive observation. When a language dies, that library closes permanently. Africa's linguistic diversity is not just a cultural heritage, it is a scientific resource. I want to tell you about a moment of rage that changed African history. In 1949, a Guinean scholar named Souleymane Kante read a newspaper article that claimed Africans had never developed writing systems, that Africa was naturally an oral continent without the intellectual capacity for written language. Kante was furious. Not because the claim was new. European colonialism had been saying this for 200 years. But because he knew it was wrong, and he decided he would prove it the most direct way possible, by creating a writing system. He spent years developing what he called Nko, I say, in all the Mande languages, a complete, functional, grammatically rigorous writing system for the Mande language family. Nko reads right to left, like Arabic and Hebrew. It has its own numeral system. It can represent all the sounds of Bambara, Mandinka, Diula, Soninke, and their relatives. Nko spread with extraordinary speed. Literacy schools opened across Guinea, Mali, and Côte d'Ivoire. The Quran was translated into Nko, giving Muslim communities the ability to read their sacred text in their own language for the first time. Newspapers and books were published. Within a generation, millions of people who had been told their language couldn't be written were writing it. Souleymane Kante died in 1987. He never saw the internet. He never saw Unicode. He never saw Nko keyboard. But his script is on all of those things now. His act of rage against a racist lie created something that outlasted him by decades, and will outlast us all. Here is the argument that should convince any policymaker who doesn't care about cultural identity but does care about economic development. Teaching African children in a language they don't speak at home is directly, demonstrably reducing Africa's economic growth. The UNESCO finding is simple and devastating. Children learn to read 2 to 3 times faster when taught in their mother tongue. Not marginally faster. 2 to 3 times faster. In most African countries, children begin school in a language they have never spoken: English, French, or Portuguese. They must simultaneously learn to read and learn a new language. The cognitive load is enormous. The result, the World Bank's learning poverty metric, shows that 90% of sub-Saharan African 10-year-olds cannot read a simple text with comprehension. They are in school, but they are not learning. This is not an intelligence problem. It is a language policy problem. Ethiopia provides the natural experiment. When Ethiopia introduced regional language instruction, teaching children in their local language through primary school, dropout rates fell and literacy scores improved significantly. The same children, the same schools, different language of instruction, different outcomes. The economic implication is direct. If literacy rates improve through mother tongue instruction, more children complete primary school, more complete secondary school, more enter tertiary education, more enter the productive economy with skills. The World Bank models this. A 10% improvement in learning outcomes correlates with approximately 5% GDP growth over 20 years. Africa's language policy is an economic policy. Treating it as purely cultural is a category error. 5 myths, 5 truths. Let's go quickly. Myth 1. African languages are just dialects. Wrong. Every African language is linguistically as complete and complex as English. Dialect is a political term, not a linguistic one. Max Weinreich said it. A language is a dialect with an army and a navy. Yoruba is called a language because Nigeria has a government. If it didn't, it would be called a dialect. Same language either way. Myth 2. Africa was illiterate before colonialism. This is straightforwardly false. Gaya's script, 1,600 years old. Tifana, 3,000 plus years old. Ajami, writing African languages in Arabic script, was in use in West Africa in the 17th century. The University of Sankore in Timbuktu had 25,000 students in the 15th century. These were literate African communities. Colonialism chose not to acknowledge them. Myth 3. African languages can't express complex ideas. I will say this once, clearly. This is racist fiction. Amharic has 1,500 years of theological and philosophical literature. Yoruba's Ifa corpus is as philosophically sophisticated as Plato. Every human language can express every human idea. That is the definition of a language. Myth 4. Too many languages cause division. False. Switzerland, 4 official languages, has among Europe's lowest ethnic conflict rates. Tanzania, 130+ languages unified by Swahili, is one of Africa's most stable nations. Linguistic diversity managed well is a cultural asset. It is political manipulation of language diversity, not the diversity itself, that causes conflict. Myth 5. Nothing can be done. Welsh went from near death to 600,000 speakers in 2 generations. Hebrew was resurrected from a liturgical language to a living national tongue. Language revival is possible. It requires political will. Africa's 2,000 languages are not just Africa's problem or Africa's asset. They are part of humanity's shared cognitive inheritance, and their loss would impoverish all of us. Let me give you 4 reasons why the world should care about African linguistic diversity, beyond cultural sentiment. Pharmacology. The pharmaceutical industry has derived billions of dollars of value from plant compounds described first in indigenous knowledge traditions. The active compound in artemisinin, the most effective malaria treatment available, was identified by Chinese researchers following a traditional medicine-led. African traditional medicine vocabularies, encoded in African languages, contain descriptions of hundreds of species with therapeutic properties that Western pharmacology has not yet investigated. When the languages that encode this knowledge die, the leads die with them. Ecology. Climate change adaptation requires understanding how ecosystems behave under stress. African communities have been observing their local ecosystems for 50,000 years. They know things about rainfall patterns, soil behavior, and species relationships that no satellite can tell us. This knowledge is in their languages. Cognitive science. Studying African languages has already overturned several assumptions about the limits of human language. The discovery that click consonants could be grammatically functional expanded our understanding of what sounds human language can use. Studies of Bantu noun class systems have illuminated how the human brain categorizes reality. Africa's languages are not just data, they are research facilities. And diversity itself is a value. Just as biodiversity makes ecosystems resilient, linguistic diversity makes humanity cognitively resilient. More ways of seeing the world means more tools available when unprecedented challenges arise. Your quick reference: 15 African languages across the 4 families. Look at the range, from Swahili's 200 million speakers to Xu's fewer than 5,000. Both are African languages. Both are complete, complex, fully functional human communication systems. One is expanding into the digital age. One is barely surviving. Note Oromo, 40 million speakers in Ethiopia, one of Africa's largest languages by speaker count, yet rarely mentioned in global discussions of African languages. This reflects the pattern. African languages are systematically underrepresented in global linguistic discourse. Note Wolof, 12 million native speakers, but functioning as a lingua franca for perhaps 80 to 90% of Senegal's population. The ratio of people who use Wolof to people who have it as a mother tongue is extraordinary. It has spread by choice, through the market and cultural influence, not through government policy. Note Kinyarwanda, 12 million speakers, but those 12 million people are almost all in Rwanda, a country smaller than Maryland. The highest concentration of speakers per square kilometer for any sub-Saharan African language. 8 things you now know that most people, including most educated people in Europe and America, do not. 1. Africa has 2,000 languages because it is old. Humanly old. The oldest. Diversity is the product of time. 2. 4 families. Niger-Congo, Afro-Asiatic, Nilo-Saharan, Khoisan. Every African language is a member of one of these 4 ancient lineages. 3. Khoisan may be humanity's oldest speech. The clicks are not curiosities. They are the world's most complex sound system, in the world's oldest human communities, in what may be our closest link to the first languages ever spoken. 4. Africa invented writing. Giez, Tifinagh, Nisabidi. Vai, Neko. Multiple independent script inventions across the continent. The Africa was a literate narrative is a colonial lie. 5. The griot is the original archivist. Oral tradition is not the absence of literacy. It is an alternative technology for preserving knowledge. And it produced the MC, the rapper, the praise singer, in every African-influenced music tradition on earth. 6. The average African speaks 4 languages. This is not a deficiency. It is a superpower. Multilingualism is cognitively advantageous, culturally rich, and a model for the world. 7. Languages are dying. Faster than you think. and each loss is permanent, not a cultural footnote, a library fire. 8. Language policy is economic policy. Mother tongue instruction produces literacy. Literacy produces productivity. Productivity produces development. This is not a hypothesis. It is UNESCO data. Africa does not have languages. Africa is languages. 2,000 conversations happening right now, each in a tongue that holds a unique way of seeing the stars, naming the plants, describing grief, expressing gratitude, telling the children who they are and where they come from. 2,000 libraries open to anyone willing to listen. A child in Ile-Ife is hearing Yoruba tones that shape how she hears music for the rest of her life. An elder in the Kalahari is speaking Exu-click syllables that preserve 100,000 years of ecological wisdom. A student in Addis Ababa is reading Gaya's script in a text written before Europe had universities. A rapper in Lagos is mixing Yoruba and English in ways that make both languages richer. A griot in the Gambia is reciting a genealogy that began before Columbus sailed. This is not the past. This is now. Happening now. In 2,000 languages, simultaneously, across a continent that was the first to speak and has never stopped. The question is not whether Africa's languages matter. The question is whether we, all of us, will value them enough to preserve them. Every language that dies is a fire we didn't put out. Every language that survives is a civilization that refused to disappear. Subscribe to GriotWave Academy. Share this video. Tag someone who thinks Africa doesn't have a written history, and show them 1,600 years of Ethiopic script, 3,000 years of Tifana, and a griot who can recite your entire family tree from memory. Asante. Ixaka. Merci. Thank you. Before you go, help this message reach more people. If you learned something new today, like the video, subscribe for more deep dives, and share this with someone who still thinks Africa is a country. Small conversations can challenge big misconceptions, and every share helps expand understanding. If you want to explore this topic further, scan the QR code for additional resources, courses, recommended readings, maps, and extended discussions. There is far more to Africa than what can fit into a single episode. And this is only the beginning of a much deeper journey into the continent's history, cultures, people, and future. And if you'd like a deeper dive into any topic related to Africa or Pan-Africanism, leave a comment below and we'll cover it in a future video.